Capital is a big driver of technological progress towards better solutions for patients, but no longer are financial returns the only measure of success in building companies. What should be our focus for optimization? How do we create sustainable social impact and value? In this session, our panel of impact investors share their diverse experiences and perspectives. Please welcome Christiana Barton, co-managing partner of BioImpact Capital at MPM Capital, Jurgen Eckhart, SVP and head of Leaps by Bayer, Alice Pomponio, managing director at the American Cancer Society BrightEdge, Glenn Rockman, founder and managing partner at Adjuvant Capital, and session leader Laura Kleiman, founder and CEO of Reboot RX.
Welcome to this panel on investing for social impact. My name is Laura Kleiman, and I'll be the moderator. I'm the founder and CEO of Reboot RX, the tech nonprofit startup dedicated to fast-tracking the development of affordable cancer treatments using repurposed generic drugs, AI technology, and innovative funding models. Today, we'll have the opportunity to learn about 4 diverse approaches to impact investing. All of our panelists are accelerating breakthroughs for patients through their investing, but how they're going about it is radically different. Our panelists are Chris Barton, co-managing partner of the Oncology Impact Fund at the large biotech investment firm MPM Capital. Jurgen Eckhart, SVP and head of Leaps by Bayer, the impact investing arm of the global pharmaceutical and life sciences company Bayer. Glenn Rockman, founder and managing partner of the life sciences investment firm Adjuvant Capital, and Alice Pomponio, managing director of the BrightEdge Fund at the American Cancer Society, a leading disease nonprofit. So to kick off our discussion, I'd like each of you to introduce yourself and your fund. Tell us about the motivation for forming the fund in the first place. What are its goals and how is it structured in terms of the source of investment funds, how financial returns are realized, and where returns go? Chris, if you could go first, followed by Jurgen, Glenn, and then Alice, that would be great.
Great. Thanks so much for inviting me. My name is Chris Barton, and I'm a partner at MPM Capital. MPM Capital is one of the world's largest dedicated biotech investors. We've been around for about 30 years. And I would say the statistic we're most proud of is not just our financial returns that we created for our investors, but the fact that the companies that we've started over the 30-year history at MPM have led to the approvals of over 53 new drugs. So I run 2 funds there. One is called the Oncology Impact Fund, as well as the BioImpact Equities Fund. You know, we've been very focused on impact as part of our social mission for the last 5 years. I think it's really become an important trend, not only for the industry, but for us personally. And so the Oncology Impact Fund is dedicated not just to creating new drugs in oncology, but also to expanding the impact of the benefits that we create. We create impact through 2 additional ways. One is through funding and expanding patient access to drugs through the UBS Optimus Foundation. And the second aspect is through donations and partnerships with the AACR, American Association for Cancer Research, where we fund cutting-edge research for the next generation, kind of hot young investigators. So anyways, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about the conversation today.
Yeah, hi, my name is Jurgen Eckhart, and I lead what we call Leaps by Bayer. Leaps is the investment arm of Bayer. It was started in 2015, so roughly 6 years ago. And our mandate is really to make early stage investments in potential breakthrough technologies that have the potential to disrupt the way we do healthcare today, or we do agriculture for that matter today. So in healthcare, we are really inspired by technologies that have potential to go from therapy to cure. And in agriculture, it's all about sustainable farming. So how can we feed an ever-growing world population, but do so in a way that sort of respects the planetary boundaries? So that's in a nutshell when and how Leaps was created. Over the last 5-6 years, we have made roughly 40 investments in 40 different companies. We have co-created companies around certain hypotheses, and we have invested more than $1.5 billion over these years. When we do invest, we follow several objectives. First of all, we also call ourselves impact investment unit. We're trying to really have an impact by changing people's lives, by curing disease, as I said. And we think it's our responsibility to invest and support the development of these technologies at an early stage. Secondly, of course, we also hope that a few of these technologies will, once they are more progressed, may end up in Bayer's divisions through a license or an acquisition. So we're hoping to get some strategic benefits from this. And then really the last thing, and it's definitely not the first, is financial returns, but it's by far not our first or second criteria when we invest. So that's in a nutshell the setup of Leaps by Bayer.
Well, thank you, Laura, for moderating this, and thanks to the organizers of the WuXi Global Panel for bringing this really interesting group together. I think the mix of perspectives of the different impact investment organizations here today should lead to an interesting conversation. And where I sit at Adjuvant Capital, which is in one sense just a traditional life sciences venture capital firm focused on infectious diseases, in another sense it's a very unique entity in that everything we do has to have intentional public health social impact attached to it in a way that can be measured and reported on over the life of our investment. And that requirement grows out of a shared belief amongst our team and our founding investors in the promise of new technologies for what we call historically overlooked public health challenges as an opportunity to both earn differentiated financial returns in the venture capital sector and to create a really important public health impact, because as the past 2 years have shown us, the availability of tools like rapid diagnostics, effective antiviral treatments, vaccines, and so many other public health interventions are essential to safeguarding the global populations that keep the economy running and contribute to our shared prosperity. So it's a huge overarching impact objective, this idea of using venture capital tools to support technologies that may not attract the traditional degree of industry attention or venture capital investment. And part of the reason our original investors got behind this model was simply to demonstrate the very difficult to wrap your head around idea that you can earn venture returns in the future, potentially from investing in things like rapid diagnostic tests for malaria or vaccines for cholera. And these are products that are designed for people who in many cases live on just a few dollars a day, but there's also billions of people out there that can be reached through increasingly robust health system infrastructure and economic prosperity that's allowing these people to prioritize their health and purchase these products. So it's something we're really bullish about, and that led in 2018 to us building upon the work that was originally created by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where I was seconded from JP Morgan as an investment banker back in 2011 and 12, and then in 2018 crystallized that into what we hope will grow into a very long-standing venture capital franchise that prioritizes infectious disease and public health over maybe some of the more traditional targets that industry and VC goes after. And we realize their returns in very traditional ways by making, for the most part, preferred equity investments in companies that are developing promising new technologies. And our investors expect no trade-offs on financial returns relative to what you would get in investing in a life science firm that did not have this public health focus. We're still early in our current life, having just announced the final close of a $300 million fund earlier this year, but the results are already really encouraging and we're excited about the future.
Well, hi, Laura. Thank you again for the invitation. My name is Alice Pomponio. I'm the managing director of BrightEdge, which is American Cancer Society's impact venture capital arm. And for those of you who don't know the American Cancer Society, we are the largest non-governmental funder of cancer research in the US, but also are very active in over 5,000 communities, providing needed patient services like free rides, free lodging, as well as the country's most vocal advocate on NIH and NCI funding for cancer research, on anti-tobacco, as well as providing needed direction and evidence to inform key provider and payer decision-making through our Cancer Atlas and our cancer facts and figures. And so American Cancer Society's broader mission is to reduce mortality caused by cancer, to end pain and suffering, and to really drive health equity. So if you consider that we through financial returns, invest for the mission, meaning generating a steady source of granting back to the nonprofit. BrightEdge is also really looking at, similar to what Glenn described, can we invest with a mission lens? And can the portfolio bring alive the breadth of solutions that are available and needed for the cancer ecosystem? Because we believe that by investing, we can achieve three-dimensional impact. We can absolutely accelerate science. And so we really believe that BrightEdge can demonstrate innovation and impact investing in a very profound, new, bold way. Just so you know that we are today a donor-funded evergreen fund where all of our investments in cancer-focused early stage companies are reinvested back to the portfolio. We were started with 25 million by the Society in 2019. Today, we're about 70 million and actively growing to 100 million when we will trigger a dividend model of the steady granting back to the Society, but also trigger the opportunity to partner around impact investment products with other institutions and investors. We've made 12 investments to date across therapeutics, diagnostic, device, and tech, and really exciting to be here.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, for those introductions. What I'd like to pause and do right now is try to see if I can summarize what I heard from each of you, because I think one of the most interesting aspects of this panel is how everybody is going about their impact investing and having a positive impact in the world in a different way. So I'm going to try to summarize the differences between your funds, and you can let me know if I've gotten anything incorrect. Okay, so we have MPM, which is a VC that's optimizing financial returns and donating a portion of the returns to philanthropy. We have Bayer, which is a corporate strategic investor that's seeking long-term curative solutions that'll put Bayer at the forefront of innovation. We have Adjuvant, that's a VC that's putting equal weight on financial and public health returns in their investment decisions. And BrightEdge, which is run by a nonprofit, the American Cancer Society. It's currently funded by philanthropy, and it's creating commercial products for the benefit of patients while generating income for the American Cancer Society. Is that generally accurate?
Yeah.
A+, Laura.
A+.
Sounds good. All right, so now we can move on to digging in a bit deeper about all of these details. I'd like to start by understanding your investors a little bit better. Who are they, and what's driving their decisions to invest? For Bayer and the American Cancer Society, what do they consider when deciding how much to invest? And anyone feel free to jump in to go first.
I'm happy to kick the process off since we're kind of a traditional financial investor. So our investors are, I would say, your standard financial investor in that they're looking for financial return, but would like to achieve impact at the same time. In general, our philosophy is you either want to make money or you want to give it away, but you don't want to invest in a bad fund which performs badly and call that philanthropy. So from that perspective, we were very careful in the way we designed the financial structure of this fund. As I mentioned earlier, the philanthropy comes primarily from the manager's carry. So that would be carry that typically the firm would receive. So we give back 20% of that, which is a very material proportion of that. In addition to that, we actually have a royalty, which is assessed on all of the drugs that will ultimately be created by the companies that we start in our fund. So for us, I think it was very important to maintain the financial integrity of the vehicle, but to structure the philanthropic portion in some ways somewhat financially independently.
And maybe I'll go next, Laura, because we're kind of a different flavor of what NPM does. As you mentioned in your very good summary, we on equal footing put public health impact as a direct result of our investments, not as a result of the upside being donated down the road, but as part of the actual primary use of capital has to create some measure of public health impact by virtue of advancing the development of neglected disease technologies that might not otherwise see the light of day. And as a result of that dual mission situation, not surprisingly, the investors that have chosen to finance our work typically fall broadly in two big categories. On the one hand, there's what we call mission-driven investors, investors who believe in the potential of our model to generate meaningful, measurable public health impact in the field, once one or more of these technologies get across the finish line, and have decided that they could use their money for philanthropy. And they're, not surprisingly, a very important part of how we got off the ground, because they very carefully understand the global public health landscape and the impact that neglected public health challenges and pandemic threats pose to global economic prosperity. And then on the other hand, you have what we call mission agnostic investors, traditional financial investors who may feel good about investing in public health interventions with intentional impact theses behind them. And it's great to have them all under the tent. It's sometimes a very debate-oriented group to get them all around dinner, which we haven't been able to do much over the past 2 years. But when you do, it's a lot of fun to talk about the pros and cons of this type of model.
Yeah, happy to go next. Bayer's overall mission is health for all, hunger for none. So we are big believers in, science can help us solve many of today's problems in healthcare and in agriculture, nutrition, really, right? And I think LEAPS overall is an important tool in the broader Bayer context to help us achieve those goals, right? Besides of what's going on in our divisions, in our in-house R&D, LEAPS is sort of our tool to help us really seize these opportunities that the so-called biorevolution is delivering to us, right? All these new technologies that we see in cell engineering, in synthetic biology, in AI and data management, etc. Right? All these things are coming together, and I think we are in this industry really going through extremely exciting times where we see all these new opportunities and potential solutions to long-held problems of mankind, with diseases and the agricultural areas. And I think the Bayer board is funding LEAPS at the scale that they have been doing and are going to do going forward, because they see that as an important transformational tool that will not only help us develop all these new therapies, but also help Bayer stay at the forefront of innovation and renew its technology portfolio.
Yeah, and our starting point is just so different coming from the nonprofit sector or the impact sector, if you will. And in fact, my own journey, having my first career in biopharma and coming to American Cancer Society as a volunteer, I think that if some firms lead with the solution, American Cancer Society in our model leads with the problem. And we happen to have some of the world's best evidence around what are persistent underlying challenges to addressing cancer mortality. When we think of BrightEdge within the context of raising donor dollars and mission-driven capital, I think it's a very compelling offering when you consider that grant making gets you the scientific discoveries, but may not get you the products and services that are ultimately accessible by patients. At the same time, when you think of all of the support that is going to real-time patient services lodging, transportation, what have you. There is a donor segment that is very excited about the idea of donor dollars that have the potential to grow, that have the potential to work in very different ways. Research is important, but it is also important to bring the outside in and reflect what the innovation ecosystem is quite good at. And I would argue that our model includes not only the innovation and the products and services that are in the portfolio companies, but actually we ourselves as BrightEdge are a social innovation enterprise. And so we can see new opportunities to address market failures and system level incentive misalignment. And I think that our donors get very excited. In fact, while we are a donor funded model trying to get to 100 million today, we've already been approached by many groups who want American Cancer Society BrightEdge to be the impact partner in a impact investment framework. And so we see lots of potential to enable others to do, as all of the people on this panel are, drive more innovation towards health equity.
Well, next I'd like to get into how you identify and assess investment opportunities. We've already heard a little bit from Alice about some of her motivations for why she's doing what she's doing, personal motivations, but I know all of you come from different backgrounds and may have different personal reasons for making some investment decisions. And I'm also curious about if there's anything about your parent organizations like Bayer or ACS that influences your investment decisions. So if you could talk a bit about what type of companies you're looking for and the framework that you use to assess them, that would be great. Anyone want to kick us off?
I'll start, Laura. Hopefully our screening approach, at least at the top level of the funnel, is fairly easy to understand. Where given our double bottom line objectives, we need first and foremost to filter out any technologies that don't necessarily broadly improve public health, at least in our definition of that. And the type of challenge that is probably most familiar to a broader audience are things like the big three: HIV, tuberculosis, malaria. These are diseases that still needlessly burden hundreds of millions of people around the world each year, and to which a disproportionately small amount of research and development dollars have historically been attributed. So we're always on the lookout for better diagnostics, treatments, vaccines, and other interventions to control those types of historically neglected diseases. And there's a whole wonderful universe of science and innovation that has been funded for decades now by public sector agencies like the NIH and BARDA and the European organizations, or private charities like the Wellcome Trust or the Gates Foundation and others who care about public health. And that's all well and good to have a really compelling small molecule treatment for a nasty, neglected disease, but unto itself, an asset like that sitting in a research lab at a publicly funded research institute or an academic institution isn't enough, for us at least. We need to see entrepreneurs, founders, experienced drug developers around the table, ideally in a investable, quote unquote, business model that we can use to channel our private financing into and help them achieve commercially sustainable long-term success, where the neglected disease asset is either the sole part of that business model, or maybe if it's a platform technology, it's just one application of something like mRNA technology to address neglected diseases on one hand, and maybe oncology on the other hand. So the overlap of that Venn diagram between major public health impact and then shovel-ready, investable, talented team with a viable business model is how we screen our investments.
Great, I'm happy to jump in next. I mean, for us, I would say at MPM, what we're really looking for are therapeutics that are going to transform patients' lives. And I know that that sounds, maybe trite and that everyone is trying to achieve that. But at the same time, I see a lot of investments in companies that are actually pretty incremental in terms of what they offer patients. And so really, if you think about it, for cancer, for example, we've been really just, delaying progression, by incremental months, and, extending life by very short periods of time. In cancer, what you actually want to achieve is cures and complete responses. And so when we look at it from that lens, that's a whole different way in terms of what the scientific criteria that you seek to achieve are. And I think, the criteria, we're looking big. we hope we can achieve that in some of our companies to really find transformative therapies for them.
Yeah, that very much resonates with how we think about investment priorities, I have to say. When we started, we defined 10 so-called leaps. These are sort of big challenges, relatively high levels. So one is, of course, is cancer. Then we have neurodegenerative disease. We have autoimmune disease and others, right? Genetic disease. So all areas where there's a big unmet medical need, right? And where we feel that with the new technologies, we can really make a real difference, right? In going from therapy to cure, right? And as we look at technologies in those areas, then that's exactly what we will look at, right? So, for example, we were then interested and have invested in gene editing to cure genetic disease. We have invested in stem cell therapy to cure, hopefully, patients who are suffering from lost tissue function, right? If you think about it, most of the disease burden in this world is really chronic disease. That's like 90% of patients are suffering from chronic disease. And most of these diseases are because patients have lost tissue function, right? So, for example, if you've had a myocardial infarct, you have scar tissue in your heart, right? That heart, with all the therapies that are available today, will never be the same as it used to be, right? But if we have, for example, stem cell technology that allows us to replace the scar tissue with beating heart muscle cells, then we can really talk about an effective cure, right? So that's how we think about which areas we want to invest in and in which technologies. Does it really have this curative potential, similar to what Chris was explaining with her examples?
And for American Cancer Society BrightEdge, I think we wear two hats. So when we think of how do we generate really robust financial returns, going back to the society, we have actually great pipeline of deal flow from the standpoint of all of our granting in basic cancer research. 25 of the immuno-oncology targets that are out there today were discovered by ACS-funded researchers. We know that many of these discoveries do go on to form companies. So in the last 2 years of all of the oncology Series A to C venture capital raises, more than 60% of those companies had either an ACS-funded researcher or an ACS-funded professor advising them, or they were licensed ACS-funded technology. And so we want to harness that tremendous deal flow, but also we want to de-risk it and really accelerate it using all of the tremendous intellectual and social capital that the American Cancer Society has. On the how do we deepen social impact side of things, there we go back to what is truly, from our knowledge base, the drivers of mortality, and is there an unmet need, and is that persistent at a population level, at some other system level lens. And so when you think of a topic like early detection and screening, we know that that is an area that right now is not ripe for investment, yet we will have insights from our prior granting in the discovery side, but also operating knowledge from our patient services work and cancer control activities with community health centers, as well as our insights into how the market is going to transform and change over time through our advocacy work. And I think this combination is how we can really bring, the model innovation to life. And so within BrightEdge's portfolio today, when we think of screening and early detection, we have a liquid biopsy cancer screening company. We have a nuclear medicine production platform to increase supply of medical grade radioisotopes, which will be used in medical imaging as well as in treatment. We have recently announced an AI radiology and pathology company that will help more providers be confident in providing screening to patients. And we also have a company that is a digital financial health company from the standpoint of automating financial navigation and helping patients remove barriers at point of care to accessing key screenings as well as treatment. So that's an example of how we would lead with the problem and be fairly agnostic and opportunistic about the solution set, as well as see our role as being catalytic for growing a more robust and vibrant marketplace.
All right, well, why don't we get into how you measure impact? So if you could talk a little bit about how you'll know if your fund is successful and successful to whom. And if you're still working on your framework for measuring impact, as I know some of you are, what sort of things are you thinking about? And if you've already realized social or financial returns, I'd love to hear if there's anything you've learned from that.
I think where we sit and have within the healthcare universe the luxury of being able to count the patients that you've reached, the patients that you've cured, the lives maybe that you've saved with a specific intervention is something of a luxury in the impact investment universe, because it's very tangible and easy to get excited about when you can say that an innovation in the life sciences sector directly led to a previously untreatable condition being not a death sentence anymore. And that's not always the case. There's a whole spectrum of social impact that can be achieved from both marginal improvements to existing technologies to breakthrough innovations for something that has never had a cure or a prevention available. And so we recognize that, and we count the potential impact of all the technologies we finance purely from a basis of the healthcare lens. How many patients are we reaching? How much are we improving their lives? How many disability adjusted life years are we eliminating? And in some cases, how many lives are we saving? And I say we, the royal we, in the sense that it's not just our capital that gets these things over the finish line. Typically, they've benefited from tens, if not more, of millions of dollars of seed financing and donor financing, and in many cases co-investment from other equity investors. So it's not all ours to take credit for, but you can look at the top line of how many lives were improved by this asset, and then carve out your contribution to that, however big or small it may be. And in some cases it can be quite big, because there's in many cases a huge but-for argument, meaning that absent the intervention or the capital that we provided, something may have just continued to sit on the shelf or never see the light of day. And we're very excited about those types of interventions. But then very briefly, there's also a whole equally rigorous package of impact measurement metrics that are more generalizable across not just the healthcare sector, but if you want to compare our impact to a clean tech fund or an education fund or an economic development fund, there's a whole universe of other metrics that look at the intentionality, the size of the impact, the but-for question I was mentioning, and you score all those elements and combine them to get a relative impact assessment of things that you may or may not do in one hand relative to what other people are doing at other funds. And I love that we have both of those sets of impact measurement to draw from and help tell our story.
Yeah, I think you make several great points, and I won't repeat them because we practice some of the same things, but I would just add a few points. One, I think part of the problem that's plagued impact investing is the lack of specificity and measurement. People like the label of impact investing, but I think have not been diligent like Glenn has been in terms of documenting specifically what that is and measuring what those outcomes are. So I think that's going to be really important going forward, especially because impact investing and ESG is kind of, I would say, a hot sector within the investing segment right now. But I think we have to be really careful to make sure that we maintain the integrity of that label. And again, I think there is also in the future more standards that are going to be set by regulatory authorities to make sure that people really are creating important impacts if that's their label.
Yeah, the slang for that, Chris, I think is greenwashing, right? Where you just slap the label on something that isn't actually all that intentional or carefully measured and monitored. And we're seeing the exact same thing, that the SEC in particular is increasingly taking a close look at asset managers who put these labels on things without actually validating and justifying it.
So again, I think the key is exactly what you call upon, which is being very specific and measuring, being very specific about what the impact is, and being very diligent about measuring that impact and doing that for each of the investments and across the fund. And that's going to be really important going forward to do meticulously.
Yeah, and if I may just add, I think this is sort of work in progress probably for all of us. You know, you can constantly and refine this every year, right? And get smarter and smarter about how you can measure all of this. We look at similar things as Glenn mentioned, you know, on the healthcare side, you know, lives saved, quality of life improved, etc. And then maybe just because you guys are not doing agriculture, on the agriculture side, of course, we look at other measures. There we look at, you know, how much arable land do you need to produce food? How much water, fresh water usage do you have to produce food? And can you be more efficient there? How much greenhouse gas emissions are created, or how much carbon can you actually capture with other plants, etc. So we have a whole vast range of different measures that we are considering across our whole investment universe, which makes this both really interesting but also tricky, right? And that's why we are constantly evolving our methods.
Yeah, and from the BrightEdge perspective, I mean, we are seeking return on prior grant capital, if you will. And so when we look at our ACS researchers, the ability to demonstrate that those discoveries have made it to patients, that there are products now launched, and that the society may have recouped some of that, you know, financial benefit as part of the strategic investing, is a very clear indicator. But also when we think of the impact side of things, you know, the American Cancer Society has tremendous track record of gathering, generating evidence, and convening consensus around, in the case of guidelines, best practice, technology assessment to inform decision-making, mostly providers and payers. Why wouldn't we be able to do that for the impact investing community as well? Because we are able to measure, you know, whether or not disparities continue to grow. We have the Cancer Disparities Chart Book, we have the Cancer Atlas, we have Cancer Facts and Figures. Since the passage of the National Cancer Act 50 years ago, almost all cancers have had improved mortality except for 3. You know, so when we think of the BrightEdge model and whether or not we can drive market level transformation and system level change, we do have the ability to measure impact at that broader societal level. And then the question is, how do we bring that to life in our own day-to-day investing within BrightEdge? The other piece that I would add is from a sustainability standpoint, because Jurgen, you mentioned that we have a lot to learn in health from environment. If health disparities is our climate change, everybody knows it exists. You know, we should be thinking of how do we generate the next generation of renewables when it comes to life science investing. And I honestly believe that there is an opportunity, you know, to build a culture of health equity within our conventional investment and innovation communities, such that we can see the alignment of incentives.
Well, we only have a few minutes left. So to close things out, I thought we could reflect on the impact investing model and where it's headed. Your funds were all started around 5 years ago. So I'm curious, why do you think we're seeing these funds emerge suddenly? Are we going to see more of them? And specifically, what do you think it's going to take for your organizations to support this in the long term?
So I would say, you know, the main motivation we had was, I think investors are tremendously interested in this field. And in fact, going forward, I think there's just not going to be just interest, but demand for creating impact. People want to see something beyond just the financial returns that our funds and our industries have created. They want to see more, I would say, sharing of the upside between the different parties. And so from that perspective, I think this is a trend that continues and gets even stronger over the next, let's say, 20 years. And so we're really excited to be part of that.
And I would just jump in exactly from the nonprofit side. You know, strategic investing like BrightEdge, and BrightEdge is still fairly new, so we're not yet 5 years old, but it was perhaps seen as a nice to have. Now I think it's a must have, you know, as nonprofits are really rethinking the sustainability of their business models and how they build financial and business resilience, but also how do we capitalize on the strengths of these tremendous, scientific grant making, research, and provider of patient service organizations in a way such that we can really broaden our impact through new financially engineered, business developed, partnered products and programs. That is how we will really meet the demand that is coming around the corner. Otherwise, I think the current philanthropic model of raising funds to grant funds and working in separate swim lanes with the private sector will just not achieve the goals that we all want.
And Laura, the underlying concepts that each of us on the panel are working with today, they've been percolating for the better part of the last 20 years. And it wasn't even until I think 2007 that the term impact investing was officially quote unquote coined by a Rockefeller Foundation convening in Italy of all places. And there have been a lot of failures or experiments, well-intentioned efforts to do this at small and larger scale. And I think what you're seeing with some of the organizations around this table is these are the models that have been either partially or fully successful, depending on how advanced they are, and have been able to achieve scale and will hopefully continue growing in the future.
Yeah, I definitely think impact investing is here to stay and here to grow, really. And I think it comes really from two sides. One is, the investors are asking it, they are interested in this. But the other side, which is even equally important, is we have technologies today and scientific breakthroughs that allow us to have really an impact, and provide step changes in how we cure patients or many other areas, right? So I think this is here to stay and here to grow.
I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to interrupt us, tie it all together. The three themes I'm hearing, science and innovation as essential to doing all this, public-private partnerships being essential, and a real groundswell of both demand and investable models coming together for impact investment products.
Awesome, I love that. Great job.
And we'll leave it at that. Well, it's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you all so much, and hope to see you in person soon.